You're good to go.
Okay, great. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the CCB Toronto Visionaries, the Canadian Council of the Blind, the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians, and our partner organizations on the ADP Reform Working Group. I'd like to welcome you all to this presentation of the report and recommendations that have come out of our investigations into the ADP and how to make the program even better than it is. My name's Ian White. I am the president of the CCB Toronto Visionaries, a local Toronto chapter of the Canadian Council of the Blind, and it's my great honor to be here today and to welcome you all. I would like to begin by talking a little bit about White Cane Week. White Cane Week is a public awareness campaign that the Canadian Council of the Blind, or CCB, runs annually in the first week of February every year. It's intended to broaden the understanding of what it means to live with vision loss and what challenges our community faces. And typically during a normal White Cane Week, we would be holding events and activities right across the country in local CCB chapters from St. John's to Victoria. And unfortunately, due to COVID, we've had to curtail or postpone many of those activities because of public safety restrictions. So this year, we will be running a number of activities in White Cane Week in a virtual format, and many of our usual activities will be postponed until later in the season, typically in May, which is Vision Health Month. So one of the things I'd like to start with is just a brief outline of which activities will be happening now and which ones will be happening later in May. Coming up on February 22nd, we'll be holding a summit on preventable vision loss. And that's, again, a virtual format that you can sign up for and register for and attend for free. On Saturday, May the 28th, so well into the month of May, we will be, the CCB Toronto Visionaries will be hosting the White Cane Week Experience Expo, which is Canada's only exposition and consumer show for people living with vision loss. We'll also be hosting the Experience Expo and Viewpoint Forum on a patient's rights to informed consent. And immediately following that forum, we'll be hosting a community social dinner here in Toronto. So you're more than welcome to check out our website at ccbtorontovisionaries.ca and look at the White Cane Week Experience Expo tab, and all of those activities will be listed there. I think if we can move to the next slide. I'd like to just outline very, very briefly how we came to be involved in this this process of trying to reform the ADP. For those of you who aren't aware, the ADP is the Assistive Devices Program. It's administered by the Ministry of Health and is a program that provides assistive devices to people with all kinds of disabilities, including those with vision loss. We came together with a number of other organizations in the blind community, most notably the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians, specifically the Toronto chapter, Balance for Blind Adults, the CCB, both here on the ground in Toronto as the Visionaries and CCB National, as well as the CNIB, came together in a working group, and that working group was assisted by Fighting Blindness Canada and by OCAD's Inclusive Design Research Center. All of those partners came to the table, and between us, we worked very hard for the last year and a half to put together the survey that we're about to discuss. And it was an enormously gratifying process to be involved in, because there was so much cooperation from all sides of the blind community. And I think that's something worth noting. It's fantastic when we can all sort of get behind an idea, and the ADP system, as we've encountered it as people living with vision loss, has had its issues for a long time, but we're now at a point where we've come together as a community to work together and try to find solutions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Michael Baillargeon, who is the CCB's Chief Advisor on Government Affairs and Special Projects. Mike, do you want to take a minute to sketch out how the survey came about?
Sure, thank you, Ian. And yes, thank you to the ADP Reform Working Group and its dedicated and hardworking members. Note, we'll be taking questions at the completion of the forum. To ask a question during this webinar, click the orange arrow on your screen to access the chat box. Then click chat and enter your text. You may also send your questions to jhall@keithhealthcare.com. His email is in the email you received to enter this forum. Let me repeat his email address though. jhall@keithhealthcare.com. That's J-Hall, not Jim. Sorry about that. Moving on, Ontario's Assistive Device Program is of prime importance to people living with vision loss. To be clear, this study and its findings deal specifically with those Ontarians living with vision loss and is not intended in any way to impact on those living with other disabilities. Our research dealt strictly with those who are blind, deafblind, or partially sighted. This has been an 18-month journey, as Ian said. It culminates today with the release of our findings and our recommendations. The entire exercise was designed to ensure that a reformed ADP would be relevant to those people living with vision loss. The primary goal of the survey, outlined in our report, is to develop a rigorous and patient-centered evidence-based form which to make recommendations to the Assistive Devices Program, the governing bodies that are informed, substantive, and reflective of the needs of Ontarians living with vision loss. Special thanks to the 466 respondents that participated in the study. You were there for us, and now we'll be there for you. Also, a huge shout out to the 272 people who are registered to attend today's forum. Thank you for taking the time to participate. The study of over 110 pages will be available late next week. It will be accessible and it will be emailed to you upon its release. With that, I would like to introduce Dr. Keith Gordon, Senior Research Scientist for the Canadian Council of the Blind and the Principal Investigator of the Vision Loss ADP Assistive Devices Program report. Keith?
Thank you very much, Mike. I'd like to echo your thanks for everybody for attending. I'd like to particularly thank members of the working group who worked together with us to put this report together. By way of background, for over 30 years, we in Ontario have been privileged to have the benefit of the Assistive Devices Program. It is unique in Canada and in many countries of the world in that we have had a government that has reimbursed the cost of necessary assistive devices. However, we don't have an issue with the program itself, but we do have an issue with the fact that there are a number of issues associated with its administration that we believe need changing, updating, and reforming. I don't really need to say this to this audience, but I did have to say it to some people in the government in the last few days, is that the technology revolution has really impacted the lives of people living with vision loss to such a dramatic degree that there are now very few activities that a person who's blind or partially sighted cannot participate in when equipped with the appropriate technology. Technology has changed the lives of both sighted and people living with vision loss, but it's dramatically changed the lives of people with vision loss, and it's up to the government, frankly, to help support this and enable people living with vision loss to fully participate in society through the use of technology. Another little piece of the background is that we discovered at the outset of this project that there were only 6,000 people with vision loss who received ADP funding in 2019, 2020. And last year, about 6 months ago, we did a study on and discovered that there are, in fact, 466,000 Ontarians living with vision loss. So 6,000 people are accessing ADP funding out of 466,000 people. So we basically begs the question is why, if this program is as good as it could be, why are people not accessing the program? Along the way to where we are today, we kept getting comments from people living with vision loss who had applied to ADP, who expressed frustration with the length of time that everything takes, and I'm sure there are people like that in the audience today. We had frustration with people expressed frustration with newer devices that were not being funded. People expressed frustration with the long wait time to get authorization. And then we had people who had frustration with the travel required to get authorization. People were traveling 20, 30 kilometers to get to an authorizer just to get authorization for the device that they needed. For people living with vision, for all of us, that's a hard thing to do. But for people living with vision loss, it's very, very difficult. And the pandemic made it even more difficult to access public transportation. And then we had people who were frustrated with the lack of response from many ADP staff that they got when they were trying to talk to ADP staff about how to access the program or to get information about how to fill out forms or whatever. They felt that they did not get the necessary sensitivity displayed to them by members of ADP staff. And then we ended up getting emails from vendors and authorizers who were experiencing similar frustration. So with all this as background, the 6,000 out of 466,000 and the frustrations that people were experiencing, we put together the Vision Loss ADP Reform Working Group that Ian has already talked about with AEBC, CCB, CNIB, Fighting Blindness Canada, Balance for Blind Adults, the CCB Get Together a Technology Program, and the Inclusive Design Research Center at OCAD University. It was, as Ian said, a unique collaboration, and what you're about to see is a result of the collaboration of all parties. So the first thing we did, we decided to do a survey of people living with vision loss. And we conducted this survey for the first 3 weeks of November last year. The survey was conducted by a survey monkey. And to get people to access the survey, to encourage people to access the survey, we emailed to Ontario residents via mailing lists from all of the organizations. We used the CCB members email list, the CCB newsletter, the Balance e-newsletter, AEBC email list, Fighting Blindness Canada email patient list, the CNIB email list, and the IRDC at OCAD University client list. So everybody has an email list, and they all came together and helped us by sending out emails to their client list. We then decided that we should also do a survey of authorizers and vendors. And we did this at the end of December, the last week in December, the first week in January. And this was a much shorter survey. It was also conducted by a Survey Monkey. And we, to get people to participate in this survey, we emailed to a list of ADP approved authorizers and vendors, of whom there are 176 in the province. So the overall goal of this survey, of the study, is expressed in the body of the copy of the ADP reform report. And Ian has already read it, but no, actually it was Mike who read it, but I'd like to repeat it. The primary goal of the survey outlined in this report is to develop a rigorous and patient-centered evidence base. And I stress that patient-centered evidence base. There are two things there. First of all, we believe that every aspect of the program should be patient-centered. The people living with vision loss should be at the center of the program. It shouldn't be, decisions should not be made by bureaucrats sitting in Queen's Park who are not living with vision loss. Secondly, we wanted to provide an evidence base from which to make recommendations to the ADP governing bodies. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't come along with anecdotes from a few people who said that they had had a bad experience, but that we could give them really solid evidence from which they could make recommendations that are informed, substantive, and reflective of the needs of Ontarians living with vision loss. The study, as Mike has already pointed out, yielded a pretty good response from people living with vision loss. We had 446 overall respondents. Of these 446, 265 said that they had accessed the program in the previous 5 years, and 181 said that they had not accessed the program. And we felt it was just as important to find out why people had not accessed the program as it was to understand why they had accessed the program. So the people who had accessed the program got asked a whole set of questions relating to their experience with the program, and those who had not accessed the program were basically asked what it was that was preventing them from accessing the program. So out of these 446 people, we have some basic demographics on them, and I've laid this out in a slide, which I will speak to. The most important thing that we pointed out to the government when we spoke to them the last few days was that 33% of our respondents, and that's by projection, that's probably 33% of people living with vision loss, had a household pre-tax income of less than $35,000, and 42% had a household pre-tax income less than $50,000. So this is a population of people that don't have a lot of money. The ADP program is a godsend in that they can get devices without laying out a huge sum of money. Well, that's what it should be, and we have recommendations to try and make it a little more affordable than it currently is. The second aspect of the respondents was that about 61% of respondents were of working age, people aged 18 to 64. Very often, people, particularly people in government, believe that people living with vision loss are pretty well only older people. And when we talked to them, we pointed out that almost 2/3 of the respondents to the survey were people of working age, people who generally need their devices to help them gain employment and to maintain employment. So devices are critical to people to participate in the economy as well as participating fully in life. Moving on, I'm going to outline the key findings of our study. There are more than this in our report. I just pulled out some of the main ones for today. The main finding was that we found that many people were dissatisfied with the overall process of acquiring ADP funding for their device. The study showed that when we asked people the question, how satisfied or dissatisfied were you with the overall process of acquiring your device, 28% of people said they were dissatisfied. Now we thought it would be higher than that, so we started digging into the responses from everybody and found that people who had said they were satisfied, when you dig into some of the questions where we asked open-ended questions, we found that people had issues with various stages of the device. Overall, they may have said they were satisfied, but then you'll find that, gee, they didn't like traveling, or they had a run-in with somebody at the ADP program, or it took too long to get an appointment for an authorizer. So we figure that if you add maybe another 10 or 15%, that gives you a truer response of how many people were actually dissatisfied with the program. If you're in business, whatever business you're in, you can't afford to have that percentage of your customers dissatisfied with your program. The first thing you would do is make sure that the product or the service that you're offering is brought in line so that you can make sure that pretty well everybody is happy with your service. We found in our survey that the length of time required for ADP funding was just totally unacceptable. We found that 57%, that's more than half the population, took more than 2 months to get ADP funding approval, with 23%, almost 1 in 4 people, taking more than 6 months, and 16% taking more than 7 months. If you need a device for whatever it is, whether it's to keep contact with your mother who lives in Montreal, or whether it's to gain employment, you don't want to sit around for 6 or 7 months until you get a response. This is just not acceptable, and it's a source of great frustration amongst many people. We found that ADP reimbursements to all parties at all levels are taking too long. So not only are people living with vision loss taking a while to get their reimbursement from government, but the vendors and authorizers are also frustrated in the length of time that reimbursement is taking. And I'll get to this again in a little bit. As I mentioned, many people living with vision loss are required to travel great distances, often on public transportation, to access approved authorizers and vendors. And we found that 31% of people said that they were traveling more than 20 kilometers to get to their authorizer or vendor, and 15% said that they were traveling 11 to 20 kilometers. So that's almost half, 45% of people traveling more than 11 kilometers to get to their authorizer. When you've got to travel by public transportation and in the middle of a pandemic, when you've got to try and make sure that you're distanced from somebody else sitting on the subway with you, this is just not an acceptable process. Even when the pandemic isn't there, it's still not an acceptable process. We found that many of today's essential devices, most notably smartphones, are not funded by ADP. We told the ADP if there's one device that they need to fund, it has to be a smartphone. 76% of people living with vision loss today are using smartphones. It is the device that is the most life-changing, and it's essential that the government step up to the plate and start funding smartphones. And we made that point very strongly when we met with them. We found, I guess we didn't really understand that people who needed their device for employment were frustrated that even though that employment was at home, they were denied ADP funding. It's an ADP policy that they will not fund devices for employment. A study we did about a year ago when we looked at the impact of the pandemic showed that a lot of people who were working from home were having to bear the cost of their device themselves, and employers were not covering that cost. And we have been told that apparently that's not legal. Employers are supposed to pay for the funds for devices that they give to their employees, but that is not happening. And this policy has to change, or all employers have to have their fingers put to the grindstone. We had people tell us that the product choice and availability through many vendors is limited. It's often restricting the individual's option and leaving them dissatisfied with their final choice. I think this is particularly true for people who wanted Apple devices and couldn't get those funded. And there are many other examples. In fact, 60% of respondents told us that they were not always able to purchase the device they need. So people are buying devices because that's the only option, and they can't afford the ones that they need, and they're basically not getting what they need for whatever it is they need it for. The cost of devices listed by ADP approved vendors is often too high when compared with other retailers. So it's not only that some vendors are charging more than others, but often when people compare the price of devices available at a vendor with some of the big box stores, they find that there is a gap there in the pricing as well. When we asked people who had not accessed the ADP what some of the reasons would be, we were told that many people who hadn't accessed the ADP said they couldn't afford to do so, even though 75% of the cost would be funded through ADP. So they couldn't afford the 25%, and the additional cost that they generally have to bear is that even though you only pay for the 25%, you pay HST on 100%. So it's like buying a $100 device that there's a special at Best Buy this month. They sell it to you for 25 bucks, but you pay HST on 100 bucks. That's what's currently happening, and it's just not acceptable. We were told that the number of ADP-funded training hours included in the setup of some devices is often inadequate, and funding for ongoing training needs to be included in the funding of the device. 42% of respondents said that the lack of access to ongoing training made it difficult or impossible for them to use their device effectively. So here we are, the government thinks they're doing really well by giving a device to people, and yet they can't use the device properly. So if we're going to fund a device, make sure that it can be used properly by funding the appropriate training. We found that a number of people expressed that who were experienced device users were frustrated by the fact that even though they're aware of technology changes, they're technology geeks, if you like, who know what device they need. They've been previously funded by the ADP. 5 years ago, they got a device from the ADP, and they know what they want, yet they've still got to go through the full ADP authorization process, even though they are fully aware of their own needs. And we came across this frustration from a number of people expressed in the open-ended questions of the study. People told us that there are a number of software programs that require additional payments when the software is upgraded to make the software, which makes the software unaffordable. So you get your software mostly 75% funded by the ADP, and then you find a year or two later that you've got to pay for the upgrades, and what was once affordable is no longer affordable. We had a number of people who told us that the ADP staff were not always as responsive or as communicative as they could be. Many respondents reported difficulty communicating in a timely manner with ADP staff, so that they would call and leave a message and it would take a long time for people to get back to them. So there were a lot of those sorts of issues happening that we felt that ADP staff need to be more aware of and more sensitive to. They were also getting, some of their responses were sent in writing by regular mail, and that they weren't able to read, and where they could have been communicated with by email or by telephone. We then started hearing from authorizers and vendors who were frustrated by the time, sorry, this was in our survey with authorizers and vendors, who told us they were frustrated by the time it takes to negotiate the seemingly endless red tape associated with applying for and receiving reimbursement. We had vendors who told us that it took over a year to get reimbursement for a product that they had laid money out for and then sold to a customer, but they hadn't got the 75% reimbursement back from the government a year later. There was one or two people who told us they'd actually stopped being authorizers or vendors I think it was, because they just couldn't put up with the endless red tape. They had to keep going back to government and saying, where's my payment? And they said, to heck with it, the financial benefit to them didn't make it worthwhile. So those are the basic findings that we came up with, and we put together a set of recommendations which we have taken to government, and we will work with government to help make some of these or all of these come into effect. The first one is that we are recommending to government that they conduct a thorough review and re-evaluation of the administration and delivery of the ADP to Ontario's vision loss community. The program has been drifting for a long time, and it's time that they took on a overall solid review and re-evaluation of how they deliver the program. The program is good, it's worthwhile, but let's get to the nub of the administration and delivery and make sure that it achieves what it has set out to achieve. We're recommending that the ADP be brought in line with Ontario's commitments to service design. There's a whole program being initiated within the Ontario Civil Service to look at all services that are being delivered by government through a process called service design. It enables one to look at the services and make sure that they are being delivered at the optimum efficiency. We're recommending that the ADP explore a more participatory system that leverages and supports community knowledge, ongoing feedback, and information sharing. In short, the ADP need to involve people living with vision loss in the administration of the program and in decisions that are made that are going to affect people living with vision loss who are accessing the program. And thirdly, we're recommending that the ADP review the cost, efficacy, and impact of all administrative gatekeeping processes. A number of years ago, the Ontario government undertook a an across-the-board process of gatekeeping. In other words, having somebody sitting there to make sure that people are not abusing the process, whatever program it is. And so it was with the ADP that a lot of these processes were set up to make sure that people living with vision loss or disabled people in general are not abusing the system by getting a device that they probably weren't eligible for. We argue that a lot of the cost associated with setting up that gatekeeping process is more than offsetting the benefit that the government receives from keeping a couple of people out who should not have accessed the program. So we're recommending that they review the cost and benefit associated with all gatekeeping processes. We're recommending that the Ontario government establish an ADP reform committee for visualized, tasked with re-evaluating the ADP. So this is not the ADP doing their own thing. It's a committee that's set out outside of the ADP to re-evaluate the ADP on an ongoing basis and to make recommendations to the ADP. And we believe it's first and foremost that a committee of this sort should be composed with, of people with lived experience at the table directing the process. And to do that, we threw in here the slogan of the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disability from 2006. The slogan they used was "Nothing about us without us." And we feel it's really important that the ADP be driven by people with lived experience, and we'd like them to consider that everything they do meets the criterion of nothing about us without us. We feel that there should be stakeholder organizations as part of this committee as well, that there should be assistive technology experts and experts in service redesign and digital transformation. Then, as I pointed out, we found that just about every step in the process is taking much longer than it should. So we feel that the ADP should make an effort to shorten the time at every step involved in acquiring approval of ADP funding. And along that line, we had a few specific recommendations. The first one we think is probably the most important, and that we're recommending that there should be virtual authorization, that one should not have to travel 20 kilometers across town to meet with an authorizer, that you can meet with your authorizer online or by telephone and get your approval to get ADP funding through an online process. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it's possible to conduct telehealth to get your healthcare needs taken care of virtually without actually seeing a doctor or a healthcare professional. So why could you not get authorization virtually? There may be a few unique cases where one has to assess a particular device, but that should not be the norm. That should be more the exception. I seem to have lost my slides here. Okay, we are back. Okay, the second step that we feel should be done to shorten the time involved in acquiring approval of ADP funding is that the ADP needs to evaluate the current process and associated forms to ensure that they're both accessible and simple and that red tape is minimized. We heard cases of people who were told that they put the wrong, a little one number in the wrong box or a comma in the wrong place, and were told they had to go back and redo their forms. Forms have got to be simple, and particularly they have to be accessible. we're recommending to the ADP that they automatically fund all applications for white canes annually. To come back to the gatekeeping, people don't buy white canes for or acquire white canes for anything other than its intended use. There's the amount of abuse of people acquiring white canes has to be zero. And we feel that in order to facilitate the acquisition of white canes, they should be automatically funded. So all you've got to do is send an email to government or phone up the government and say, hey, I want to apply for a white cane. And they say, yeah, here it is, we'll give you, we will approve it. So that will not only speed it up and make it affordable for many people, but it will take a whole block of bureaucracy out of the ADP that could be used to facilitate the acquisition of other devices. We're recommending that the ADP establish a device review group. This is separate from the overall committee that we're saying should be overseeing the ADP. This is a device review group to regularly review available visual aid devices and make recommendations for the addition or deletion of those funded by the ADP. As I've already sort of mentioned, is that the devices that are currently being reimbursed have not been kept up. They need to be current. They need to reflect current technology and current needs of people living with vision loss. Within all of our organizations of the working group, we all have experts there who know what the latest technology is and can contribute by advising the ADP what devices should be on that list, and just as importantly, those that shouldn't be on the list, so that the more important ones can be afforded. As I mentioned, the affordability of devices is a major issue, and we are recommending that all visual aid devices funded by the ADP should be exempt from HST. What's currently happening is that you get a device, 75% of the cost of your device is funded by the ADP. You pay for the 25%, but you are paying HST on 100%. It's like getting a discount on a device at Best Buy. The device cost you $100 last week. Today it's on special for $25, but you pay HST on $100. This is what's currently happening, and it shouldn't happen. And we're recommending that HST should not be charged on the full device, not even on the 25%. We discovered that there are significant assessment fees being charged by authorizers, and we were told that these fees run anything from $75, and we had people tell us that they cost as much as $300. This is just an additional cost, which provides an additional financial barrier for people being able to afford their devices. So we're recommending that the ADP reimburse the authorizers if they have to, but that authorizers should not be charging that whatever fee it is to people acquiring devices or people getting their authorization. We found that not only are they charging the $75 that the government says they should charge, but they also, in many cases, charge an additional fee, and we feel that that should be removed. We discovered that people who are under 65, who are on ODSP, the Ontario Disability Service Program, usually get the full cost of their device covered. So the ODSP covers the 25% that they would have had to pay. So now people turn 65, they no longer have ODSP. They go on old age security, and they no longer have that 25% covered. We're recommending that the ADP should pay for that additional 25% for people over the age of 65, for people who cannot afford it. And the way to assess that is to make that available at no cost to people receiving the guaranteed income supplement. The ODSP was meant for people who could not afford it. So the ODP supplement was meant for people who couldn't afford it. We believe that should continue and assess it using the guaranteed income supplement as the criterion. Then we are recommending that people who have been funded by the ADP shouldn't have to be reauthorized when they apply for funding on a subsequent occasion. People know what devices they need. They just need it updated. They need a new device, and they should just be able to say, hey, you funded me 5 years ago for this device. I would like the latest model. Please, I don't have to go through the full process. In this day and age, again, through the pandemic, we find that just about everybody is buying just about everything online. I am a committed online purchaser. Over a year ago, I don't think I bought, over 2 years ago, I didn't buy more than a couple of devices a year, a couple of purchases a year online. Today, I buy just about everything online. And we feel that devices should be available online from vendors and major retailers in a similar way. And the ADP should work with vendors and major retailers to ensure that this happens, so that you can get your ADP approved device online. You shouldn't have to travel across town to go and see a vendor just to pick up your device. We're recommending that funding for all devices needs to include the costs associated with training. As I pointed out, people had said that they couldn't use their device properly because they didn't get the appropriate training. And along similar lines, we feel that all software should include free software upgrades within the effective lifespan of their acquisition. So you shouldn't have to pay extra money for your device after you've acquired it. So you shouldn't need to pay more for additional training. You shouldn't have to pay more for additional upgrades of your software. We found when we went to the ADP and asked if they would distribute our survey to people who had accessed the program through email, we discovered that they didn't have a list of email addresses of their clients. So we're recommending to the ADP that they should put together a complete complete database of email addresses from clients so they can keep in touch with their clients. And that email should be the primary method of communication with people living with vision loss. If they have to communicate by direct mail, it should be fully accessible. A direct mail was their primary method of communication. The last customer survey that they sent out to people who had accessed the program was conducted about 3 years ago, and it was sent out by regular mail, and not surprisingly, it didn't get a very good response. We're recommending that the ADP should conduct brief customer satisfaction surveys with 5 to 7 questions by email immediately after the client's ADP experience. In a similar way, when you go to a retailer, if you buy something from the Bay, they send you an email almost immediately saying, would you mind filling this out and tell us how we did today? We feel that the ADP should be doing the same thing. And at the same time, they should be doing more comprehensive surveys on a regular basis to find out how they are doing in delivering the ADP program to people living with vision loss. We found that not surprisingly, because of the large number of people that are accessing the program, that there's a high level of or a low level of awareness of people about the program. That awareness is not only amongst people living with vision loss, it's also amongst healthcare professionals. So ophthalmologists, optometrists, occupational therapists aren't even aware that the program exists. So the ADP needs to undertake a comprehensive marketing and communication strategy so that an ophthalmologist can say to a patient, hey, you know, it seems to me you do really well if you had this such and such a device. Why don't you apply to the ADP program? And here's how you can do it. That kind of knowledge doesn't exist right now, and the ADP needs to close that gap and ensure that it happens. So that's a long list of recommendations. There are more in a 110-page document. To conclude, we believe that the ADP is a unique and an excellent program. We don't want to see it go. We just want to work with government to ensure that reform takes place so that the program can be of real value to Ontarians living with vision loss. My last slide here, I have a picture of a long, narrow road in the country. It's mainly here because I took the picture and I like it a lot, but it also reinforces that we may seem like we're on a long road, but we all need to work together to make sure that this happens. We made a presentation to the health minister's personnel, the people in the health minister's office last Friday, and today we got an email saying that we're delighted with our presentation and they're really happy to work with us. So the way forward is to work with the political side of government and with the ADP program itself to ensure that some of this reform happens and happens quickly so that people living with vision loss can get the real value of this program. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Mike. Mike?
I'm just making sure. Thanks very much, Keith, and thanks for the presentation. Before we get to the questions, I got a little housekeeping here to do, because as being part of White Cane Week and the forum and with the summits and all the events that are coming up, the Canadian Council of the Blind would like to say thank you, and that we couldn't do it without the people that have supported us in this and allowed us to be doing the type of research we're doing, and that. So as we celebrate White Cane Week 2022, the Canadian Council of the Blind wishes to express its most sincere appreciation and gratitude to all our sponsors for their important contributions and ongoing support. We couldn't do it without you. Together, we're working to change what it means to be blind, and that's important. Again, thank you. And so, you know, those are our gold sponsors are like Allergan, AMI, Accessible Media Incorporated, which will be back with the Canadian Curling Championships next year, Bosch and Lomb, Bear, Bell, Leptician Thea, Novartis, Roche, and Via Rail Canada. Those are the people that allow us to do the type of events that we're doing today. And with that, I'm going to go to the questions in the chat and work down the list a little bit. So let's see. The first question is, what are the next steps with the Ontario government? It comes from JOH.
Mike, would you take that?
Yeah, no, I'm just going to, what the working committee and what Keith and I have been working with the government of Ontario going back almost over a year. We've met on 3 or 4 occasions with the people from the ADP who have been very transparent and forthcoming in providing us with information that was publicly available to us. We've also had opportunities to meet with people and staff from Minister Christine Elliott's office. Everybody is interested in doing what is best for the vision loss community, and also to work with us regarding this reforms. So we're pretty happy, and while we're sitting here looking at trying to reform the ADP, we shouldn't forget that the province of Ontario is literally the only province in Canada that has any type of program dealing with assisted devices. We went across the country and looked at every province, and outside of Alberta, which has a minimum support set up for assisted devices, nobody has a program like this. And so our goal with this, and what we preach to the province of Ontario, is that, hey, you've got an opportunity, you've got a great program. You know, we're asking you to look at it in the point, not as the overall program and everybody's disabilities, but let's take a look at what we can do better for the vision loss community. And our hope is that the province buys into the fact of, let's take this, let's create a template, and let's take it to Ottawa, because maybe the federal government should be helping and be responsible through accessibility and inclusion, that some of this is taken care of. So best way to say it is that I'm happy, and I think we've been successful working with the province, and then the province is appreciative of the fact that we're working with them and that we've done this. They needed evidence. What's your evidence that this is there? Well, you know, we had an unrestricted grant, and we took the grant and we applied it to the study, and there's our evidence. And prior to today, we've had 3 meetings, and we presented to both the minister's office staff and to the people at ADP. We were well received by both parties. We were very well received by the ADP. They've been provided information that they need, and we'll get the full report when it's out. And we met with the working group last night. So this is Keith's 4th presentation in 4 days. So anyway, so you know, that's it regarding the government of Ontario. Let's see, second question. Is an alternate to the government administration, CCB or CNIB or anybody else possible? The government has to take a look at it. In the study, we found that the GTT program that the Canadian Council of the Blind has to get together with technology was recognized as doing some of the training. The CNIB is already a authorizer. What we found in looking at this is that there's 9 authorizers. 4 of them are between Kitchener, Waterloo, Bradford, and Toronto. 5 of them are. So the program has huge voids across the province for people achieving authorizers, and that's one of the reasons we looked at people being able to virtually be accommodated for the program. So the question asked is a little premature to see how anybody would be looking at in a go forward situation.
Mike, can I just add to that?
Yeah, go ahead, Keith.
I think that organizations like CCB or CNIB don't have the ability to look at the full breadth of the problem. We've, if you look at our recommendations, we've gone, it's not just the delivery of the approval and the authorization. There's a whole slew of issues related to this, and it's really beyond the scope of an individual organization to do that.
Yeah, I agree. Angela Demera asked a question. What about the feds and other provinces? And I think we've answered it. We hope eventually to be able to use the Ontario template, or to use our influence with the CCB offices and the different other CNIB offices and everybody to get it nationally. But that's still going to take a lot of work. Keith, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think it's important. Last year when we did the study on the need for a national vision health strategy for Canada, we included programs like ADP should be included in a federal national strategy. Ontario has a program like this. It should be across the country, and we're advocating for it within the national national eye health strategy. But let's get Ontario right first and use that as a template for other provinces.
Keith brings up an interesting point, and what we probably would like to do is send everybody an opportunity to participate in the petition that we're going to the government with, which is stopvisionloss.ca. And the petition that we're talking about asks for a national eye care strategy that the government has promised 4 times and signed on the dotted line at the World Health Organization, at the United Nations, that they would create one going back to 2003. If we had that national health strategy, Vision would be involved in it. We've also asked to have a Vision desk in Ottawa, and we've asked that there be more research monies made available for vision research. So that's something that when you see, if you get an email, which could be, and the next short while could be coming from you, a number of areas. If you get an email that says stopvisionloss.ca, please fill it out and sign the petition.
Mike, I'd like to address the next question, if I may.
I was just going to read it to you because I figure you should. I'll read the question, and Keith, you can have at it.
Okay, please read it.
Is it possible that 61% working age, or the 61% working age is due in part to the fact that the survey modality was via email and SurveyMonkey, and thus perhaps excluding older adults who are not used to computer technology?
Yeah,
and that was presented, by the way, that question comes from Deborah Gold, Dr. Deborah Gold from Balance for Adults.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Gold. The answer is yes. That's absolutely, that we acknowledge that there is a potential bias of some sort anytime we do a survey that's electronic, in that you are excluding people who don't have access to a computer or don't have email. But it is, having said that, we did recognize that, and we, in the email to people, we said, if you want to conduct the survey by telephone, we gave them a number they could call, and we did do a number of surveys by phone. It was the same survey, but it was filled out by one of our volunteers from our working group, who phoned these people and got them filled out. So there is some bias in that, but we did what we could to try and make it a little bit more accessible to people who couldn't fill out a full survey on SurveyMonkey.
Keith, would some of that bias, or how would you deal with the fact that the people, we went out to ask people that, one, had accessed the program in the last 5 years, and two, if you hadn't accessed it, we went out to the 2 groups. Would that have been, would that have created the bias, or would that have been just maybe the reason of some of the numbers that we're looking at?
I think it's just the reason for the numbers. I mean, in a sense, you're preaching to the choir, if you want to put it that way, that people who are filling out the survey already have devices. So if people need a computer and don't have any access to technology, they wouldn't have got the email. So there's definitely a bias involved in that. But overall, you know, we got enough people who responded to this. The 446 people, frankly, if you want to get into the statistics, they met the criteria of meeting the 95% confidence level, and they had a margin of error of 5%. So this is a significant survey. The data is valid. It's valid for people who use the program. We acknowledge that there is a potential bias there in that we didn't access enough people who didn't have access to email.
Okay, we've got a pile of questions coming in, so bear with us. How large is the annual ADP budget in Ontario, and what share relates to vision disability? So I'll take that. The budget at ADP budget in the last 3 years has grown from $425 million to $624 million this year. As far as this is part of the reason we ask people why they haven't been accessing the ADP program, the ADP Assisted Device Program. 6,000 people with vision loss over the last several years have applied for ADP. Of that 6,000, 4,000 were using low tech and 2,000 high tech. The total amount of money that went to people with vision loss of the 466,000 potential clients for ADP was $2.9 million. That begged the question, why that? So, like the answer to the question, it's 2.9 million out of 400 or 624. Next question. Wow, getting big here. Deborah Gold, that one. Achieving change requires political will, and as such, who within the ministry have you presented these findings to? And question, growing evidence in the Ontario Health may assume certain ADP program. Do you believe there is an opportunity to further your cause through Ontario Health? I think we've answered that. We're working with the province, and we think we can achieve our goals where we're at right now. Tammy Brooks asks, will the 25% coverage be extended to CPPD recipients? They do not get the same as ODSP. Keith?
We're not making that recommendation. Frankly, that's up to the CPPD as to who they fund. We're asking the ADP just to take over the ODSP part that disappears at age 65. I don't know how CPPD works, but if that also quits at age 65, maybe you know more about it than I do, Dan.
Yeah, as far as I understand it, the CPP disability support disappears at 65 and everybody transitions to OAS.
Okay. Well, then I guess we would be making the same recommendation.
Okay, Alan McIver, he's a vendor. We stock visual aids, and when the patient buys it from online sources, and then the patient buys it from online sources, why would I stock an example of a visual aid? Is the government going to supply the different aids to show patients? The government does not pay me as an optometrist to do an ADP assessment. I don't know where the $75 figure came from. I don't know, it sounds like a unique situation, Keith.
Okay, you know, I think that's a whole different area. We didn't get into the fact that optometrists have to have these products on hand for which they've got to put out money. I think your argument is a valid one. We found that people were being charged. As I said, the study showed that people were being charged authorization fees that ranged from a few people got charged $25 all the way up to $300, but the largest number of people were being charged $75. When we looked into it, that's just my understanding that that $75 was the fee that was charged by authorizers, and that they were getting reimbursed that amount from the ADP. If that's not the case, excuse me, Ian, do you know?
I think typically the fee that we're talking about is charged primarily for a high-tech assessment. I don't know if the same fees apply to low vision aids and or mobility devices. I don't believe they do. Primarily, it's a cost that's leveraged against people who are going for a high-tech assessment. So for computers, CCTVs, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Judith Lawrence, what about the repair of devices? I have a Victor reader that will cost over $200 to have it, that cost over $200 to have it assessed and maybe fixed. Only 3 years old and a big investment. That's something we never got into about repairs. So that's also a problem that we haven't looked at. Am I correct?
Yes. You know, I think these are all valid questions that should be added to the agenda when that committee is eventually formed and gets together and looks at it. But these are additional issues.
Yemi Brooks, does the reform account for adjusting allowable timelines for purchases? Example, new computer only every 5 years, CCTV, magnifiers, handheld, all have different allowable update times for program eligibility. So I think you might want to deal, we did look at the, Keith, we did look at the fact that 5 years was more of a political date than with everything changing so fast. So did you want to deal with that, or you or Ian?
Well, I think we're recommending that be part of the overall review process, that they look at the 5 years and see what's appropriate. 5 years may make sense for a device that lasts 5 years, but if that device gets superseded by a new one in a 3-year time frame, maybe that should be 3 years. So I don't think it should be 5 years across the board. I think it should apply to the particular device. Ian, you were going to say something?
Yeah, to a certain extent, the existing program does have variable timelines, as the questioner indicated, for different kinds of devices. Some can be renewed in a 3-year period, some it's a 5-year period. I think part of the problem and part of the reason we're recommending an overall review is that the 5-year window was set decades ago. The pace of change of technology has accelerated over that period. And I think that the 5-year window may or may not be a legitimate standing timeline. It needs to be looked at as part of the overall review of the program itself.
Just to let everybody know, all these questions we're going to take a look at, and they're very good questions, and we'll look at adding them to any kind of go forward list of things that we should look at. Ali Massa, you mentioned working together. How do we work together? Well, I think an example of the last year and a half shows how the community can come together. Any answers to that, Keith or Ian?
I think the key is just to keep the lines of communication open.
Yep.
Continue to meet regularly, continue to update each other on progress made or questions that come up, new issues that need to be addressed. I think it's really about keeping those lines of communication open.
Keith?
I agree, and I think, you know, I don't know who you are, Mr. or Ms. Musa, but if you are part of one of the organizations that is part of the working group, we suggest that you make your issues known to the people in the working group, and we'll continue to work with you.
Judith Lawrence is asking, what does the federal government take responsibility for? In this case, ADP at this point is a provincial requirement. It falls under the Minister of Health. And right now, it's something that has to be taken to the feds, but they're not responsible. The provinces are. Okay, Sue Ricketts. Question number 1, is there something better than a white cane for those with walkers? I don't know. Ian?
That's a really hard one. The very nature of using a walker requires both hands.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we are currently living in a world where direct tactile feedback is pretty much the only way we can do it. There are a couple of products on the market that have come out in recent years. One is a product, I believe, out of either the UK or the States called the Strap, which gives you haptic feedback based on a series of sonic sensors of obstacles in your course. I don't know how accurate it is, and I don't know how reliable. But I know there are burgeoning technologies right now that are in research and development. Some of the products are in early stages on the market, and some of them are incredibly exciting and do provide realistic opportunities to have alternatives to using a white cane. I remember reading a number of years ago a book by a Vancouver-based blind writer, Ryan Knighton. He wrote a book called Cockeyed, and he talks about the white cane. He says, you know, we have so much technology. I mean, you think about the incredible, you know, technology that goes into the International Space Station or the shuttle program or the telescopes that have been launched recently, the Mars landing. And when you lose your eyes, which is the most complicated system in the body, what you're given as a replacement for that is essentially a stick.
Yeah.
And, you know, it sounds ridiculous, but it's the tool of choice because it gives us the kind of feedback that we need to stay safe while moving around.
Yeah.
But I think we're on the cusp of an era where new technologies are coming out all the time. They need to be evaluated in real world situations. And if they are reliable alternatives, then yeah, we should pursue those, and those should be covered under ADP.
Let's go to our second question, which I find interesting. Can the Ontario government insist that all public buildings should have either QR codes or Wi-Fi with directional programs for navigation? That would fall under the Minister of Health, Minister of for Seniors and Accessibility. It's an interesting question. What I will tell you, Sue, is we're going to find out where that situation is, and we're going to get back to you on it. It's a very good question, and I think what we'll do is we'll get back to you with an answer and see if we can provide it properly. The next question is from Sam Markowitz. My question is, was at any time a recommendation considered to abolish the separation between low-tech and high-tech authorizers and allow all current authorizers to provide for both high-tech and low-tech? After all, currently there are about 11 high-tech authorizers only in the province. I'm going to turn that over to you, Keith. But what I will say is that the government website, ADP website, lists 10 authorizers, and of the 10 authorizers, one of them resigned effective January 28th. There are 5 CNIB authorizers, and there are OCAD University Balance for Blind Adults, and 2 hospital situations in Toronto. Keith?
Okay. I can't say whether that was ever decided whether the 2 should be done together, the low and the high tech. You point out quite correctly that there are far more low tech authorizers than high tech authorizers. But interestingly enough, the issues that we discovered with low tech and high tech, the length of time that things took, and the level of satisfaction. I did an analysis where I took the people who were acquiring low-tech devices compared to those who were acquiring high-tech devices, and compared the length of time that it took and the level of satisfaction. And in both cases, there was no significant difference. So people who are acquiring low-tech devices are taking just as long as people who are acquiring high-tech devices, according to our study.
The comment from Dr. Gold, it sounds like the program is still operating much as it was when founded 30 years ago and not set up for the digital devices at all. Hence the problem getting software upgrades and add-ons paid for. A complete overhaul to bring the program into today's world is essential.
Agreed.
Totally agree.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that that the program has not kept pace philosophically with changes in society. The digital revolution has completely changed the way we operate as a society, and this program was conceived in the late 80s and implemented in the early 90s. And I'm not saying that it has not changed at all since then. It has, but I don't think it has kept pace with the rapidity of change that we've seen over the last 3 decades. So I think those comments are absolutely right on the mark.
Yeah, I agree. And Jurek, for the 6,000 who received ADP funding from 2019 and 2020, what was the respective high-tech ADP claims, are both high-tech and low-tech? I thought I said it, but I'll say it again. Of the 6,000, 4,000 were low-tech, 2,000 were high-tech. Lynn, are there recommendations being implemented across the board to order other disability groups other than vision loss? I'll answer that. No. I would think that what we've done by looking at vision loss is we may have allowed them to get an idea of what some of the across the board situations would be for other disabilities. But our intent is that we can't speak for people with other disabilities, and this survey was strictly done for people with vision loss.
Now that may also ramify out, because some of the recommendations we're making have to do with general review and overhaul of service delivery. If those changes are implemented, they would be implemented by ADP in general and would probably ramify out to other disability groups. I'm only speculating here, but as Mike says, the intent of this study was primarily to focus on the vision aids category and those other aspects of ADP that are directly related to vision loss.
The Kristen Walden, who is an optometrist, optometrists are funded a certain amount from government for an authorizer. Whoops, just disappeared. For authorizer assessment. Therefore, we need to see an have an equally with funding for all involved. So it's an optometrist pointing out that the ophthalmologists get more money for that. Hopefully the optometrists and the government of Ontario will solve their differences in the next short while, and our children and seniors will be taken care of. Keith, thanks for your response on the question of not surveying those without computers or tech access. I believe that this idea that many citizens with disabilities do not have access to computers might explain the low uptake on the ADP program, since getting the information about ADP would often come through the internet. Exploring low uptake is an interesting next step for this research.
One of the things that has always struck me as deeply ironic is the fact that the only place I've ever seen information about the Assistive Devices Program in Ontario is on the internet. If you're someone who is in a situation where you've lost vision and you need an assistive device in order to access the internet, you would not be in a position to research the possibility of receiving ADP funding unless you already had the device. And that speaks back to the recommendation about doing a better job, ADP doing a better job of communicating and making information available about accessing the program through more channels, so that we can get around that single source digital block and give people who don't have access to digital media right now the opportunity to know about and access the fund.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you, Ian White, President of Toronto Visionaries, CCB Visionaries. Keith, thank you very, very much. That's the last question that we have there. I would like to thank everybody that hung in there and was present for today's forum. I hope you go away with something that you feel was valuable, and you've got our email addresses if there's anything we can do, or if you've got any additional questions. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great evening and good night.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming here this evening.